There's a moment most people never talk about, when the practice goes on, but the faith starts to wear thin. Not giving up, something quieter than that. The person who still meditates, still writes their gratitude, still holds the intention, but who, in some deep, private place inside, has stopped waiting for anything to actually change. Not out loud, just inwardly. And sitting at the center of that silence is a question that stings more than it should. If I truly carry this power they said I had, why hasn't it shown up? That question deserves a better answer than the ones it usually gets. In 2022, the Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded to 3 scientists for proving something that had challenged the scientific community for decades. That distant particles, with no contact, no signal between them, can influence each other instantly, as if the space separating them were, at some level, beside the point. The universe, as the evidence suggests, connects what appears to be separate. What if the distance between you and what you want is, at a more fundamental level, smaller than anything you were taught to believe? That's the central question of quantum consciousness, a real field of research trying to understand how the human mind and the physics of the universe intersect. What it has found doesn't offer easy answers, but it offers something more valuable, a layer of understanding that most people have simply never been given. What I'm going to explore with you in this video isn't a new technique. It's a different perspective on a power you may already carry, one that deserved from the very beginning a more honest explanation. If there's still a part of you holding the door open, this video is for that part. Think about the people who took this seriously, not the ones who tried it for a week and moved on. The ones who studied, practiced, applied everything consistently, who read the books, took the courses, turned the first hour of every morning into a ritual of intention, who weren't skeptical, they were committed, and who, somewhere along the way, began to notice that the results didn't match the effort. The feeling is specific. It's not the disappointment of someone who tried once. It's the quiet exhaustion of someone who tried many times, honestly, wholeheartedly, and arrived at a conclusion that hurts to admit, maybe I'm just not good enough at this. But here's what almost no one says in that moment. That conclusion is probably wrong. The problem is real. Something isn't working. But the diagnosis may be pointing in the wrong direction. What stuck may not be the intensity of the practice, the depth of the belief, or how often you visualized. It may be something more structural than that. Think of a bread recipe. If someone teaches you that flour, water, and yeast are the ingredients, and tells you the bread will come out if you knead it with enough effort and faith, you'll try. You'll give it everything you have, and the bread won't come out right. Not because you did it wrong, because the recipe left out the resting time, one single variable. Without it, all the other ingredients can't reach the result they were meant for. The practices of inner transformation, visualization, gratitude, vibrational alignment, conscious intention may be genuine ingredients. The problem may not be that they don't work. It may be that one instruction was missing from the guide. That instruction has everything to do with who is doing the practice. Not what, not how, who. There's a difference, one that sounds small in description and feels enormous in experience, between visualizing a reality you want and observing the world from within a reality that is already yours. The first position is anchored in longing. It quietly broadcasts a signal inward and outward. I don't have this yet. The second is anchored in belonging, in presence, in who you already are, not who you're trying to become. You're not stuck because you're incapable. You're stuck because you learned to operate from a position no one ever explained. And when that position shifts, the way everything arranges itself around you shifts too. And this is where quantum physics entered the conversation in a way no one expected. The most famous experiment in quantum mechanics, which we'll explore carefully ahead, revealed something unsettling. Subatomic particles behave in radically different ways depending on whether or not they're being observed. Not physically altered, not touched, just observed. That raised a question researchers are still debating. Observation may not be a passive act. It may participate in creating what is being observed. If that holds for the smallest particles in the universe, what does it say about human attention? About the inner state of someone observing their own life? I'm not offering an answer. I'm pointing toward a direction, because science has taken it seriously enough to spend decades exploring it. Quantum consciousness, co-creation, the role of the observer in manifesting reality. These aren't just spiritual metaphors. They're hypotheses that researchers in laboratories with rigorous methods are still investigating. And what that investigation is beginning to suggest, with all the caution science requires, is that you may never have been as separate from what you desire as you were taught to believe. What we're about to explore together doesn't fit into a formula, but it matters. And it may be exactly the conversation that was missing. There is something happening right now that seems completely simple. You're processing images, sounds, maybe the sensation of your body's weight, the rhythm of your own breath, the quality of light in the space around you. All of it arrives with the ease of an open window, as if the world simply walked in and you simply received it. But what's actually happening is far stranger than it appears, and far more extraordinary. Inside the skull, there is no light, there is no sound, nothing resembling experience at all. What reaches the brain isn't the world, it's electrical signals, tiny impulses, colorless and formless, traveling through a network of neurons at speeds we can barely imagine. The red of a sunset doesn't exist out there. There is an electromagnetic wave frequency. The brain transforms that frequency into color. The sound of a song that gives you chills doesn't exist in the air. There are pressure variations. The brain transforms those variations into melody, into emotion, into involuntary memory. The smell of rain on dry earth doesn't exist in the rain. There are volatile molecules. The brain transforms them into the most precise sensation you know, the one that, for some reason, always seems to point towards something larger than itself. All of this to say one simple and enormous thing. You don't receive the world. You build it, and in building it, you participate in it in ways that go far beyond what we've learned to call perception. This raises one of the oldest questions humanity has ever asked. One that, unlike many old questions, still has no satisfying answer. A stone has atoms. It doesn't feel grief. A cloud has molecules. It doesn't feel wonder. A modern computer processes more data per second than the human brain does in hours of thought. It feels absolutely nothing. So what's different? How do the same atoms that make up the dust on a road arrange themselves a certain way and suddenly feel, suddenly love, suddenly lie awake in the middle of the night wondering why they exist? This question has a name. In philosophy and science, it's called the hard problem of consciousness. It's not hard for lack of data. It's hard because no mechanical explanation, however precise, however detailed, can satisfactorily answer the most basic question of all. Why is there something it's like to be you? Why does experience exist? Neuroscience has mapped with remarkable rigor what happens in the brain when someone feels fear, love, or that specific sensation of recognizing a face they once loved. It knows which regions activate. It knows which neurotransmitters are involved. It knows a great deal about the hardware, but the hardware of sadness isn't sadness, just as the description of every note in a piece of music still isn't a symphony. That gap between mechanism and experience, between biology and feeling, is the exact place where a new generation of researchers began asking different questions. Questions classical physics had no tools to answer, and that's where quantum physics entered. Not as an answer, as a better set of questions, because if what we call experience doesn't reduce entirely to neuronal mechanics, if there's something in the process of consciousness that still escapes what we can measure, then perhaps consciousness isn't merely a product of the brain. Perhaps it's something the universe does through the brain. And if that's true to any degree, even as a fraction, even as a possibility, then what it means to be an observer is far larger than we've been taught. That's what we're about to explore. There is a difference that seems impossible to see from the inside. When you want something intensely, a different life, a version of yourself that hasn't arrived yet, a reality yet to come, the desire itself seems like the engine. And it makes sense that it does. The desire is real. The will is real. The dedication is real. What's hard to see is the position from which that desire operates. Think of two people looking at the same horizon. One is in a boat, in the middle of the ocean, trying to row to shore. The other is on the beach, feeling the sand, looking at the same point. What each one sees is technically the same. What each one feels about the distance is completely different. The first is moving towards something. The second is already where they need to be. When we practice manifestation or co-creation from a place of inner lack, when we visualize what we want from a feeling of absence, when we affirm because we feel we need to convince something or someone, we're in the boat. And the boat, no matter how hard we row, reinforces what we call distance. It wasn't a lack of effort. It was the place from which the effort came. Think about how different it feels to wake up in the morning with the sense that there's something important to achieve, versus waking up with the sense that there's something important to live. The first carries an almost imperceptible background tension, a state that whispers, "Not yet." The second carries a different quality, quieter, a state that simply says, "Already." This isn't about pretending everything is fine. It's about the point from which you relate to your own life. That difference in state, internal, silent, nearly impossible to name from the inside, may be exactly what separates a practice that circles the same place from one that opens a path. This isn't a criticism. It's an observation about how human attention works. The mind has an ancient and efficient mechanism. It filters the world according to what it already believes about itself, not out of stubbornness, out of economy. Processing all available information every second would be impossible. So the brain selects, and the selection criteria is deeply tied to the identity we carry. If the image we hold of ourselves is someone who is trying to get there, the filters of attention search for confirmation that the shore is still distant, not because the universe is working against anyone, but because that's literally what the mind is oriented to find. When that identity shifts, even subtly, even quietly, only internally, the filters shift with it, and what was invisible starts to appear. Psychology and neuroscience have described this process for decades: confirmation bias, neuroplasticity, attentional priming, technical terms for something that, in practice, means what you believe you are shapes what you're able to see. What quantum consciousness brings to this conversation goes beyond that, and that's what the next chapters will explore. But before that, something needs to be said. You weren't wrong to want. You weren't wrong to practice. There was nothing to be ashamed of in the path you walked. You were doing your best with the map you had. And the map wasn't complete, not because someone hid something, but because this layer of understanding was still being built. In some ways, it still is. What changes when you begin to understand the position of the observer isn't the intensity of desire. It's the place from which desire speaks. And that place, as physics began to suggest in ways that surprised even the researchers themselves, may be far more determining than any technique. In 1801, a British physicist named Thomas Young conducted an experiment that seemed simple. He placed a light source in front of a barrier with two slits, two thin cuts, like two parallel lines on paper. On the other side, a wall to record where the light landed. If light were made of particles, like tiny solid balls, the result would be predictable. Two illuminated lines, one in front of each slit. But that's not what happened. What appeared on the wall was a pattern of alternating stripes, light and dark, spreading to the sides. The kind of pattern that only emerges when waves meet and interfere with each other. Like two circles in water when you throw two stones at the same time. Where the waves combine, the water rises. Where they cancel out, it flattens. Light was behaving like a wave, not like a particle. Unsettling, but still explainable. The mystery came later. More than a century later, with more sophisticated instruments, scientists repeated the experiment, firing one particle at a time. A single particle, alone, traveling through space toward the barrier. The reasoning was straightforward. Without two simultaneous particles, there can be no interference. One passes through a slit, reaches the wall. Simple. But as results accumulated over time, the same striped pattern reappeared, as if each particle, alone, was passing through both slits at the same time, exploring both paths simultaneously, and interfering with itself. A thing can't be in two places at once, unless, before being observed, it actually is. So scientists installed a detector, an instrument capable of recording which slit each particle passed through. And here is the point that still makes physicists uncomfortable today. The moment the detector was switched on, the moment the experiment began to observe which path the particle was taking, the striped pattern disappeared. The particles stopped behaving like waves and started behaving like ordinary objects. 2 lines, 1 per slit, exactly as marbles would. The particle wasn't touched, wasn't physically altered, just observed, and it changed its behavior. This raised a question that physics still debates seriously. What exactly does observing mean in this context? The measuring instrument is physical. It interacts with the particle in some way. Many physicists argue it's that interaction that collapses the behavior, not consciousness itself. Others, including thinkers who weren't satisfied with that answer, ask whether the line between instrument and conscious observer is as clear as it seems. The answer hasn't arrived yet, and it's honest to say so. What has arrived is something simpler and more unsettling. At the most fundamental level of reality we can measure, the act of observing seems to participate in creating the outcome. Before observation, a field of possibilities. After, a defined reality. We're not saying that thinking about something makes it appear. That would be an extrapolation science doesn't support. What we're saying is something more precise, that at the scale where matter organizes itself before becoming the world we perceive, observation isn't neutral. And that, even if it's only a window into a larger question, changes what it means to pay attention, changes what it means to be present, changes, perhaps, what it means to be the kind of observer you choose to be at each moment of the day. Physics doesn't offer a manual on how to use this, but it offers a foundation for taking seriously what many spiritual traditions have always sensed, that human consciousness and the world it perceives are not completely separate things. They are parts of the same process. Somewhere right now, a leaf is receiving sunlight. It sounds simple. The leaf captures light, produces energy, survives. Photosynthesis, something we learned about in school, something that sounds mechanical and predictable. What no one teaches in school is what happens in the very first moments of that process. When a single packet of light hits the leaf, it needs to travel a path to the center where the energy can be used. That path is a labyrinth of molecules, complex, with many possible routes. Most of them waste energy along the way, but the leaf doesn't waste any. Experiments have measured the efficiency of photosynthesis's first step as extraordinary, far beyond what any random path would explain. When scientists investigated how this was possible, they found something unexpected. The energy doesn't choose one path. It explores all of them at once, like a wave, and instantly concentrates on the most efficient one. The leaf uses quantum effects, not by accident, by design. Life learned over billions of years to operate at a level that goes beyond classical physics. Think of a migratory bird crossing continents guided by something human eyes can't see. For decades, scientists knew migratory birds used Earth's magnetic field to navigate. What they didn't understand was how. That field is incredibly weak, too weak to activate any known biological sensor. The answer came from quantum physics. Inside the eye of certain birds, there is a specific protein. When light hits it, it creates 2 electrons that begin behaving as a pair, connected, sensitive to each other, in a state physicists call entanglement. Earth's magnetic field subtly influences how that pair reacts. That minimal influence reaches the bird's brain as directional information. The bird doesn't reason about this, doesn't calculate. It simply knows where north is. It navigates the world using a process that operates below the level classical biology could explain. The same thing is happening inside every cell in your body at this exact moment. Enzymes, proteins that conduct chemical reactions fundamental to life, sometimes need to move atoms from one point to another within a molecule. By classical physics, those atoms should be blocked by an energy barrier, like trying to push a ball up a hill without enough force. But the atoms don't climb the hill. They appear on the other side. The phenomenon has a name, quantum tunneling. The atom doesn't go around the barrier. It passes through it, exploring the quantum possibility of being on the other side before it even gets there. Life uses this. In you. Right now. What does all of this mean, taken together? That quantum physics isn't a distant phenomenon confined to particle laboratories. It's the substrate on which life operates, silently, with an efficiency human engineering still hasn't been able to replicate. The leaf didn't study physics. The bird didn't learn about entanglement. The enzyme doesn't know the word tunneling. And yet all of them operate in this field with precision and elegance. If the simplest life on the planet found a way to use these principles, what does that say about the most complex biological system we know? What does it say about the human brain? That's exactly the question an American anesthesiologist began asking. And it led him to one of the most fascinating hypotheses about consciousness science has ever produced. His name was Stuart Hameroff, an anesthesiologist, a specialist in safely switching off consciousness hundreds of times over an entire career. Every day he put patients to sleep, and every day, while their bodies kept breathing, hearts kept beating, brains kept humming along, those people simply left. The person he'd just been talking to, who had asked questions and told him about their family, was gone. Not dead, not exactly asleep, absent. And no one could explain exactly why. The standard explanation said anesthetics blocked receptors on neurons, interrupting communication between cells. It made sense until Hameroff came across an anomaly he couldn't ignore. Xenon, a single atom, no molecular shape, no chemical binding, none of the complexity of other anesthetic substances, and yet, administered at the right dose, it switched off conscious experience with the same efficiency. If neuron receptors controlled consciousness, xenon shouldn't work. There was no way it could fit into the picture, but it worked. Something smaller, something deeper inside the cell, was being affected, and Hameroff began looking for what? What he found were microtubules. Imagine tubes so thin that thousands of them, lined up side by side, would fit within the width of a single human hair. Inside every neuron of the human brain, there are millions of these tubes, a structure that for decades was treated as simple internal scaffolding for the cell. Support. The skeleton. Hameroff looked at these tubes and saw another possibility. Their structure, hexagonal, organized, elegant, resembled a kind of architecture that in other contexts could sustain and protect fragile quantum states. Those states of possibility that, as we saw in the double-slit experiment, exist before reality defines itself. What if microtubules weren't just support structures? What if they were the place where consciousness forms, not in the connections between neurons, but inside them, at a deeper layer? This is where Roger Penrose enters, a British mathematician and physicist whose work on black holes earned him the Nobel Prize, a thinker who had spent years troubled by something uncomfortable. Human consciousness doesn't behave like a purely mechanical system. Penrose had a hypothesis about what causes quantum collapse, that moment when possibilities transform into a defined reality. His proposal was that this event isn't random, nor simply caused by the environment. It would be determined by the very structure of space-time itself. In simple terms, when something exists in two states at once, it creates an instability in the fabric of the universe, and the universe resolves it, chooses one state, at a frequency that can be calculated. For structures the size of microtubules, Penrose calculated that these events would occur about 40 times per second. 40 times per second, the same rhythm as the electrical waves the human brain produces when awake and conscious. Hameroff and Penrose proposed together that these events inside microtubules might be exactly that, the flashes we call consciousness. Each moment of experience, each now you feel, would be the universe collapsing possibilities into reality, inside you, dozens of times per second. It's a hypothesis, controversial, debated, still without definitive experimental confirmation. And it's honest to say that. But it's also a hypothesis that serious researchers, at serious institutions, continue exploring, because no other explanation has satisfactorily resolved the hard problem of consciousness we opened at the beginning of this block. What this idea suggests, if it holds any truth, resonates with something many spiritual traditions have expressed in different words, at different times. That you are not merely a brain processing information, that at some level, consciousness isn't just a product of biology. It's the place where the universe becomes capable of perceiving itself, of questioning itself, of participating in its own creation. And if that's so, being a conscious observer isn't a passive function. It's an active participation in the creation of what exists. Let's bring together what we've traveled through. The brain doesn't passively receive the world, it builds it, transforming electrical signals into color, sound, beauty, and meaning. Quantum physics showed that at the most fundamental level of matter, reality exists as a field of possibilities before being observed. Life, from photosynthesis to the flight of migratory birds, learned to operate in that field. And perhaps the very act of being conscious is, somewhere inside each neuron, the universe collapsing possibilities into experience, dozens of times per second. There is a thread running through all of this, and it has a name in physics. In 1964, Irish physicist John Bell formulated one of science's most elegant questions. If two particles have interacted, do they maintain some connection even after separating? The answer, confirmed experimentally over the following decades, and celebrated with the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2022, was yes. When two particles interact and then separate, they continue influencing each other instantaneously, regardless of distance. No delay, no signal traveling between them. The influence is immediate, as if the space between them simply didn't factor into the equation. Physicists call this quantum entanglement, and what it implies reaches far beyond laboratory curiosity. The universe, as the evidence suggests, is not a collection of isolated objects trying to communicate from a distance. It's a web, and what we call separation may be, at a deeper layer of reality, nothing more than an appearance. This has a technical name, non-locality, and it carries an implication that resonates well beyond laboratories. If the particles that make up your body, the atoms, electrons, molecular structures of every cell, have, at some point across billions of years of cosmic existence, been in contact with the rest of the universe, and if quantum entanglement suggests this connection doesn't disappear with physical distance, then the gap between you and what you desire may be, at a more fundamental level, smaller than it appears. This isn't a promise that wanting is enough. It's a different way of understanding what it means to be separated from something. And that difference changes everything about the position of the observer. Many spiritual traditions arrived at similar conclusions through entirely different paths. That we are part of a larger whole. That the boundary between self and world is more apparent than real. That there is a field of connection that precedes what the senses can detect. And that spiritual practice, in its many forms, is a way of becoming conscious of that connection. Quantum physics doesn't confirm these traditions. Science doesn't work that way, and it would be dishonest to say it does. But it points, with its own instruments and its own language, in the same direction. There's something worth pausing to notice in that convergence. When two completely different ways of knowing the world, contemplation and experiment, arrive at the same territory without one having known the other, that deserves attention. So what changes, in practice, when you begin to inhabit this understanding? If the separation between you and what you desire isn't absolute, if there is a connection that precedes the perceived distance, the question shifts. It's no longer, how do I get there? It becomes, how do I become someone who already belongs here? Not a change of technique, a change of position. And that's exactly what the next block will explore, concretely, accessibly, and with both feet on the ground. Think of a moment when you were waiting for news about something you really needed. The phone quiet, time dragging. What happened in your body during that wait? There was tension maybe, something tightening in your chest. Your attention fixed on what hadn't arrived yet. And the more it fixed there, the heavier the silence became. Now think of a moment when you were waiting for something you wanted, but somehow felt was coming. The wait looked the same from the outside, but your body was somewhere else entirely. More open, less locked, present in a different way, same external situation, a completely different inner state. That difference, anxious or present, contracted or open, not yet or already, is what we mean by the position of the observer. It's not a physical posture. It's not a breathing technique. It's not forced positive thinking. It's the inner quality from which you relate to what you desire. And that quality, it seems, changes what you're able to see. Remember the image of the boat and the beach? The problem wasn't the destination. It was the experience of oneself while rowing, the identity carried during the effort. I am someone still trying to get there. The person on the beach doesn't want less. They have a different relationship with what they want. The sand under their feet isn't conquest, it's presence. And presence changes the way the horizon looks. This isn't resignation. It isn't accepting things as they are and stopping wanting. It's something closer to, I know this is possible for me, and that knowing lives in my body before it lives in my circumstances. Quantum physics, as we've seen, suggests the observer isn't neutral, that the position of whoever is observing participates in creating what becomes real, and that the separation between the observer and what they desire may be, at a deeper level, smaller than it appears. If that holds any truth, the challenge isn't to work harder to reach something distant. It's to learn to inhabit, more honestly and more often, the state of someone who already belongs to what they desire. Not as performance, as recognition. I can't say with certainty exactly how this works for each person. No one can, with complete honesty. What seems to happen, in the accounts of many people, and in what psychology and neuroscience are beginning to map, is that when this inner place shifts, the filters of attention shift with it. The invisible gains shape. What seemed out of reach begins to become possible, not because the world suddenly changed, but because whoever is observing it began doing so from a different place. And whoever observes from a different place naturally acts differently, notices opportunities that used to pass undetected, makes decisions that used to seem too risky, relates to people and circumstances from a quality that generates new responses. The shift isn't passive, it has real, visible consequences, but it begins inside. It always begins inside. Perhaps the most honest question isn't what should I do differently, but where am I looking from when I do it? There's a moment that happens for a lot of people who begin working with this inner state. The morning goes well. There's a different quality of presence. The already feels real, close, livable. And then the day actually begins. The message that didn't come. The bill that came due. The conversation that was hard. And slowly, without even noticing, the old observer has returned. The tension back in the chest. The not yet whispering again. It's not failure. It's inertia. A day has 1,440 minutes. If the new state occupies 10, 15, 20 of them, and the rest follows the old path has every advantage. Not because it's more true, because it's the most familiar, the most worn, the one the mind takes without needing to think. The reality a person experiences isn't a reflection of their most intense moments. It's a reflection of their most frequent ones. This isn't pressure. It's an observation about how attention works, and about where the real work actually happens. Not in the morning, throughout the day, not in the intensity of a ritual, in the quality of presence that runs through what you're already doing. And here something appears that seems to change things considerably when people understand it. This work isn't about doing more. It's closer to what happens in a meditation practice. Anyone who meditates knows the goal isn't to never have a wandering thought. That would be impossible. The goal is to notice when the mind has drifted and gently return. No judgment, no drama. Just, oh, I wandered. I can come back. The question isn't how do I never leave the right state? It's, when I notice I've left, can I return without punishing myself for having left? That might seem like a small thing, but self-criticism for the slip, the feeling of having failed again, is what keeps many people anchored in the old observer. The gentle return is, in itself, an act of alignment. For most of the day, without realizing it, we drift back to the identity of someone still trying. It's automatic, the most repeated pattern, the oldest habit. What changes isn't trying hard enough to never leave that place. It's developing the soft practice of noticing when you've left and returning. Oh, I'm observing from lack again. Can I come back? Sometimes yes, sometimes not completely, and there's room for that. What matters isn't the perfection of the state, it's the growing familiarity with it. Over time, the already starts to feel less like effort and more like home, and the old pattern begins to reveal what it always was, a habit, not a truth about who you are. This practice doesn't ask you to step away from life to achieve it. Working, caring for relationships, handling what's difficult, all of that continues. What changes is the inner quality of whoever is doing those things. The state from which decisions are made, perceptions are formed, responses are given. A difference that from the outside may seem invisible. From the inside, it changes everything. And as that observer becomes more familiar, as the already begins to feel more natural than the not yet, something starts to emerge that may be the greatest surprise of this entire journey. The reality you've always desired wasn't waiting for you to conquer it. It was waiting for you to recognize it. There is something that happens when you spend enough time seeking something you feel is true, but that hasn't arrived yet. A certain weariness, not from the effort, from the waiting, from sustaining a belief in a world that, for a long time, hasn't confirmed it. That weariness was the starting point of this video. It's what brought you here, and perhaps now it can be seen from somewhere else. Because if quantum physics suggests that observation participates in the creation of what becomes real, if the field of possibilities exists before being observed, and the observer collapses that field in a specific direction, then what do we say about someone who, even exhausted, even in silence, even without knowing exactly why, keeps knowing there is something more? What kind of observation is that? It isn't the observation of lack. It's the observation of something that hasn't manifested yet, but that the person, somewhere beneath rational consciousness, keeps treating as real. In the language of physics, even though physics doesn't use exactly these words, it's the observer maintaining coherence with a possibility that hasn't yet collapsed into visible reality. In human terms, it's faith operating as a force of observation, not passive belief, the stance of someone still pointing the field in a direction, even without seeing the result. Now go back to the beginning, that part of you that didn't close the door, even after the frustration, even after the cycles that didn't break, even after the questions that went unanswered, even after the faith that grew tired, and that, even so, didn't close the door for good. What was that part? Maybe it wasn't stubbornness, maybe it wasn't naivety, maybe it was the field, the connected whole of which we are expressions, refusing to lose contact with what it always knew was possible. Not for you, through you. You weren't on the outside of something you wanted to reach. You were the point in the field where that possibility was trying to become real. You were the point in the field where that possibility was trying to become real, collapsing the wave, moment by moment, in the direction of what you always knew was possible. There was no prison. What existed was a state of consciousness, a point of view, built over time, fed by old fears and an incomplete map that needed to be reframed. Reframing isn't erasing, it's looking at what was, at what shaped that point of view, with gratitude, not for the suffering itself, but for what it revealed, for the path that, however winding, brought you here. And from that recognition, moving through the fear that held that point of view in place. Fear protects, but sometimes it keeps protecting against threats that no longer exist, holding the observer in a state that was useful at another time, but that has already served its purpose. When that state is seen with honesty, it loses the power to stay invisible. The observer begins to move, and with it, the field begins to collapse in new directions, toward the dreams that were always more real than fear allowed you to imagine. We are sparks of a whole, not metaphor, not consolation. The particles that make up your body have, at some point across billions of years of cosmic existence, been in contact with the rest of the universe. And quantum entanglement suggests this connection doesn't disappear with physical distance. Neuroscience suggests the act of being conscious may be the universe collapsing possibilities into experience, through you, dozens of times per second. If that holds any truth, you are not a spark trying to reconnect to a distant fire. You are the place where the fire is happening right now. That part that didn't close the door knew this, not in words, in something older than words, and now you have a little more vocabulary for what it always knew. There is a difference between reaching the end of something and finishing. This video will end, but what was touched here doesn't end the same way, not because there was some magical revelation, but because understanding something, truly, in the body, not only in the mind, changes the place from which you observe. And the place from which you observe changes what you're able to see. This doesn't need to be called transformation. It can simply be called a different lens. What changes when you begin to notice the state from which you observe your own life is that the state loses something it had before, invisibility. While unseen, it operated freely. It determined what you noticed, what you expected, what you believed was possible. Without resistance, because without a name. Now it has a name. And what has a name can be observed. And what can be observed is no longer identical to the one doing the observing. You are not your habitual state of consciousness. You are the one who can observe that state, and, from that observation, choose where to stand. That difference, small in description, is enormous in practice. The path from here isn't linear. It isn't a staircase of steps to complete. It's more like a practice, like learning an instrument, like tending a plant, like anything that grows through repeated attention and honest care. There will be days when the old observer returns with force, when the faith grows tired again, when the not yet weighs more than the already, and there will be the gesture of returning, gentle, without punishment. Oh, I drifted. I can come back. That gesture, repeated over time, is what consolidates change, not the intensity of one moment. The faithfulness of many. You arrived at the end of this video different from how you arrived at the beginning. Not dramatically, perhaps almost imperceptibly. But something was named here that had no name before. An understanding that now occupies space where before there was only an unanswered question. And that part of you that didn't close the door, even when everything felt heavy, even when the silence lasted longer than it should, it has already begun to walk differently. Not because it arrived somewhere, because it now knows, with a little more clarity, where it's walking from. If this conversation made sense to you, if something here resonated in a way that goes beyond words, there is more to explore. Other territories of the same field. Other questions that deserve to be taken seriously. Leaving a like and subscribing to the channel isn't just supporting a video, it's keeping the door open for conversations that continue deepening what was touched today. And if you'd like to share it with someone who also carries an unanswered question, perhaps this video is a good way of saying, you're not alone in this search. The universe, by all indications, doesn't operate in straight lines. It operates in fields, in possibilities, in observers who change what collapses into reality. You are one of those observers, and that, just that, is already enough to begin.